Hello, my name is Sheila Kane and I'm a district manager at Lodge Brothers. I have many years of experience in arranging funerals with family members after their loved ones have died, and also helping people to arrange their own funerals in advance. The focus of Dying Matters Week this year is the importance of being in a good place to die. And I thought it would be really interesting and helpful to have a chat with Sophie Andrews, solicitor and head of Lodge Brothers Legal Services, to ask her advice on the things that a person can do to get their affairs in order, to make things easier at a practical level after their death. I'm going to give some scenarios to Sophie and seek her advice. So Sophie, my parents are getting quite old and I would like some advice on what they can do to make things easier for me, my brother and my sister in the future.
Sure, this is something that happens to us all, and my mother's getting older as well. I think the first thing that you should ensure is that your parents have up-to-date wills. Do they have wills at the moment?
They do, yes.
They do. Okay, so if they've already got wills, it's really just a question of having a look at them, getting them out, reminding themselves of what they've put in their wills, and seeing if they're still happy with what they say. Sometimes I find that clients say, well, I've looked at my will, Sophie, but I really don't understand what it says. In which case I say to them, well, if you send it in to me, I will have a look at it. You tell me what you want the will to say, and I will tell you if it says what you think it does.
That's really good.
Because it may well be that the wills they've got already are absolutely fine. People often worry that the addresses are out of date, but that doesn't matter. But sometimes, your parents might have appointed executors who've passed away, in which case they'll need new executors. And just in case, for anyone who doesn't know, an executor is the person who will deal with your parents' affairs when the time comes.
Okay, I think that's my sister actually.
Okay.
She's been mentioned.
So your sister will be fine. And then as long as the wills cover the situation where, I would imagine what your parents want to do is that your mother will leave everything to your father, and then on your father's death, he'll leave everything to you and your siblings. And as long as the wills do that and are as they're happy, then they're probably fine. But it's always worth getting them professionally checked over just in case they want to be updated. And I'd say to anyone who has parents without wills, I would strongly be urging your parents to take some advice and get an up-to-date will. Obviously, if someone dies without a will, then they die intestate, which isn't necessarily a problem. A husband and wife, invariably everything would pass to the survivor. Often all the assets are jointly held. But it's not always the case, and it's always better to have a will, because if you have a will, it's easier for your loved ones. There's clearly an executor appointed, so the banks and anyone else knows who they can deal with, and life is easier.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
The other thing they could also think about is lasting powers of attorney. Now, a lasting power of attorney is a document where someone, whilst they're fit and well and mentally capable, can decide who they would want to have as their attorneys, who would act for them to deal with their finances if there comes a time when they're unable to deal with their finances themselves. That might be because they're old and frail and, quite frankly, they can't be bothered to do it themselves, and Sheila, they'd rather you did it. Okay. Or it might be because, very sadly, they might lose mental capacity and just simply not be able to deal with their affairs at all.
Oh, I see. I think that happened to my aunt when she got dementia. There was a little bit of fuss afterwards where they couldn't sort things out. So that probably was something they should have thought of as she was getting progressively worse.
Exactly. So having a lasting power of attorney in place is so helpful, because if you do lose mental capacity, your relatives have got no issues. They can act as your attorneys and step in and deal with things for you.
Okay, so you can do that even if you're not ill, So I could do that if I wanted to. I could make somebody.
It must be done whilst you're fit and well.
Oh,
so
okay, that's not something you think about, is it?
It isn't. You are a perfect person to be making a lasting power of attorney.
Okay, that's lovely. That's made me think. Gosh, I hope our viewers will think about that.
There is also another type of lasting power of attorney which deals with health and welfare. So that is something that, again, is made whilst you're fit and well, and you decide if you would like to appoint attorneys who will make decisions for you about your medical care, where you live, how you're looked after, and things such as that. And that's only ever used if someone loses mental capacity, because obviously while someone has mental capacity, even if they're suffering a bit from dementia or they're a bit elderly, they're still able to make their own decisions.
Okay, right, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Lastly, something else that I'm sure you know your parents should be thinking about is a prepaid funeral plan.
Yes, I do. I try and talk to them about it. I think they think because I work in the industry that I'm just want to talk about work all the time. But yeah, I do try and introduce that. So
Yes. Well, I've been really interested to see how beneficial a prepaid funeral plan can be. And I'm sort of changing my views on them since I've been working with Lodge Brothers. I have found that so many people come to me when I'm helping with their parents' estates or their husbands' estates, and they tell me how so relieved and happy they were that their mum or dad or whoever had actually made a funeral plan, because that way they knew exactly what mum or dad wanted, and they don't have the worry and the stress of planning the funeral because mum or dad has already done it and they know that they're going to get, as I said, exactly what they wanted. What I think is interesting now is that through seeing how helpful families find it, I actually think a funeral plan is for everybody, even someone with a large estate who might think, well, it's not for me because, cost isn't an issue. In fact, it is just so helpful. So I do try and advise all clients to consider having a prepaid plan, because there's so much for people to deal with when they've lost their mum or dad that this is one less thing. And with all of this planning, I often tell clients, they say to me, oh, Sophie, I've been meaning to write my will for years and I'm finally getting round to it. And, that is normal. We're all like that. We don't like talking about death. We don't like planning. We don't like thinking about these things. But clients, once they have done all of this, they are so pleased. They feel so reassured. They feel, oh, thank goodness, I don't need to worry anymore. And, on the other side of it, once those people do pass away, I hear from their children, other loved ones, relatives, oh, well, it really has not been nearly as bad as it might have been because mum or dad had everything really well in order and well organised.
Brilliant. Okay. So you've covered some of what I was going to ask you, because I actually wrote my will when I was buying my first home and I was pregnant with my first child. But now my 3 children are adults, and sadly some of the people that I mentioned in my will, like grandparents who've got older, or my sister-in-laws who've passed away, sadly. So they've actually, left us young and before we sort of can do what we needed to do. And I want to leave a large donation to Great Ormond Street. So what do you think I should do with that? Obviously, you've said I need to review my will, which I haven't done. As I've said, I did it many years ago.
So this is exactly the case where, a will is not a one-off job. We make a will at a point in time, and it really should be made to cover the immediate circumstances and the next few years, if you like. So you can't, if you're very sensible like you have been and you make a will when you're relatively young, that's fantastic. But you cannot rely on that will being fit for purpose 20, 30, 40 years down the line. So I think a will should be reviewed probably at least every 10 years. When you're younger, you can leave it a bit longer. As you get older, maybe a bit more regularly, just so that it is always does what you want to and reflects your changing circumstances.
Okay, that's really helpful. I'll probably be in touch with you soon.
No problem.
So another worry that I've had, and again, I think you've sort of mentioned, but if I got dementia or had an injury, I know that's a bit morbid, but after this year and seeing so many COVID and people going into hospital, and not being prepared, it made me think, what if? So some of the things you've talked about are probably the things you might say to me.
Absolutely. So as we were saying earlier, a lasting power of attorney, those are the things to have, and they're not just for when you're old. They are for those awful what if terrible situations that sadly do happen. So yes, you should make lasting powers of attorney. You can decide who you would want to deal with your affairs if something awful should happen. Having said that, obviously there is a system that is there for people who have not planned ahead, and essentially, someone can arrange for the situation to be dealt with, but it's much harder when it's at that time, because there's nothing in place and the system is different. So if you did have a terrible accident and were unable to deal with your affairs and you hadn't made lasting powers of attorney, then it would be a question of somebody, a family member, most likely, applying to the Court of Protection to be appointed as your deputy. And that process is fairly complicated, takes time and is very costly. And essentially a lasting power of attorney achieves the same thing, but so much more easily and cheaply.
Okay, so it definitely is, lasting power of attorney is something we should possibly all have sitting in our sort of
Absolutely.
admin pack at home.
And I always say to everybody, hopefully you won't need it.
No,
but if you do, oh
there.
My goodness, people will be pleased that you have.
Okay, that's really good. So my next scenario is, my daughter's 27, so that's now you know when the will was written. She owns her own home, but she thinks that she's too young to think about making a will. So my question was, is she right? And what would happen if she died without making a will?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think that you're never too young to make a will. And certainly if you own your own home, you definitely need to be making a will. My daughter's 18, and obviously because she knows I'm a solicitor, she keeps saying to me, Mummy, I want to make a will. I'm going to leave everything to my brother and sister. And I say, well, darling, that's lovely, but really, you don't really need to make a will. You haven't really got any assets. And now she's at university, I suspect all she's got is debt. So, she's a little young, but your daughter, she's a homeowner.
Done that. She's done the debts. Now she's building the nest.
And she's a homeowner, so she definitely does need a will.
Great, okay. I'll be talking to her about that as well then.
Yeah, and you also asked what would happen if she didn't have a will. So if she didn't have a will, the technical term is that she would die intestate. And that would mean that her estate would pass under the intestacy rules, and what she has will go to, a set out list of nearest family members, inherit in order. And I suspect from what you've said, it will probably be you.
Okay, right, lovely. Well, maybe I don't know if I want all her admin and finance, but I'll bear that in mind. So my neighbour is someone who, again, I chat to, and when people know what you do, they ask questions. So she is considering making a will, but she's told me she's got a will kit, or she's going to do it online to save costs. Do you think that's a good idea?
I can't emphasise enough the benefits of a professionally drafted will. People are put off because they think they're expensive. Okay, so a proper will from a solicitor is a few £100s. Yes, that is not an inconsiderable amount of money. But if you consider how much your estate is worth, including the value of your home, and let's face it, in the southeast, all our homes are worth plenty of money. The price of the will compared to what your home is worth is nothing. And the other thing to bear in mind is that I really think a cheap will is a false economy, because, okay, it might cost you nothing to do it now, but I can tell you, we obviously deal with a lot of probates, and when we deal with estates and someone comes in with a homemade will or a will, drafted on the internet, me and my colleagues, our hearts sink, because they're not properly done often. I'm not saying always, but very often there are problems, and it makes our job so much harder dealing with the estate, and the costs go up so much more than the cost of the will would have been. So, we find, you can end up costing thousands extra to deal with a badly drafted will. And the will would have cost, £400, something like that?
Okay, and you mentioned probate there. Sorry, it's a word I hear a lot, but can you just explain that?
Yes, so probate is basically the process of dealing with someone's financial affairs after they've died.
Okay, because we hear that, people come in and say, "Oh, I've got to do probate. I don't know what I'm doing." So that's something you help with as well.
That is something absolutely we help with. So we will help with anything really legal that is sort of associated to death or dying in a funny sort of way. So we help people who are thinking ahead, like your parents, who need to put in place their wills and their lasting powers of attorney in their funeral plans. And we also obviously support people on the other side of things, dealing with the affairs of someone when they have passed away. And that is probate.
Okay, lovely. And I know from working in the branches that yourself and some of your colleagues do come out and visit the branches and perhaps meet our clients in the branch. So that's something that's really nice if they can perhaps meet you in the branch that they've arranged the funeral for their loved one, or they feel comfortable. So you're willing to do that as well.
Absolutely. So we very much do that, and we find that that's something that clients really like. They obviously have built up a very good rapport with their funeral arranger who's really looked after them, and then they feel comfortable at the funeral branch. They know where they're going, and yes, we will go along and meet them at the branch and see how we can help.
Lovely, that's really helpful. And would you do a home visit for anyone if they wanted?
We do home visits. Obviously, with the current situation with coronavirus, that is very tricky. So really, the first option is probably in the branch. But, we appreciate that there are people who are housebound, and of course, where we can, we will go and see them in their homes.
Well, I think that's really helpful. So thank you for all that information. You've certainly got me thinking. So I've got to sort out my will, tell my daughter to do hers, and think about lasting power of attorney, and then I'll be ready to go.
That's right. It's been really lovely to chat.
Okay, well, if you'd like any more information, please visit our website, or you can call us on 0203 540 6658. Thank you.